One of my readers offered a comment about the accuracy of my takes on the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting and claimed that there was an article that I should read that really sets the matter straight. And this was an article that was well written, very objective, and it was written by a former police investigator and a trained journalist. Oh man, when you hear that, you know you've got something really good going on here. So I went ahead and looked at it. And the reader posted part 2 of the series. I went back to part 1. And this gives you a really good indication of just how far we have fallen in the field of journalism. Hello out there. I'm trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnnie Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnnie Walker Dread Show.
Okay, so here is the article. I'll post a link to it in the description below if you really want to bother reading it. The first part basically goes over the charges as alleged in the charging document, a criminal complaint filed by the district attorney of Kenosha County. And if you read the charging document in full, it reads like it was written by the defense. It is so weak. However, let's go ahead and I'm going to blast through this here. Following are the facts as alleged in a truncated 4-space affidavit of probable cause by the police. Okay, and he cites a source for it and mentions that Kyle has been charged with these crimes. And then he claims, next week, part 2, we will examine the opinions that have been offered around these allegations. People I am meeting cannot tell the difference between facts and opinion. Well, after reading this, you'll start to wonder that maybe they have it right and you don't. You can hold the two up to the light and hopefully not only examine the particular situation, but what is wrong in America right now. We're going to find out what's wrong in America right now by reading this man's diatribe. And we're going to see how it is that people have become so enraged against Kyle Rittenhouse without a shred of evidence really to convict him. Okay, so who is this person? It is Sean Inlow. Okay, and he's writing for the Courier Express. I'm not familiar with this newspaper. It's probably an online newspaper. Following the defendant is Rosenbaum, and trailing behind the defendant and Rosenbaum is a male who's later described as Richard McGinnis, a reporter. And he's a reporter for the Daily Caller, which is kind of a conservative news outlet. As they cross the parking lot, now keep in mind, this is all from the charging document, so he's just repeating what was in there. As they cross the parking lot, Rosenbaum appears to throw an object, a plastic bag, at the defendant. Okay, what was in the bag? It's not clear. Some people claim a brick, some claim that it was empty. Couldn't have been empty. Had to have something in it. And a lot of people are claiming it was just his daily necessities from being in jail, like a toothbrush and stuff like that. The second video shows that the defendant and Rosenbaum continue to move across the parking lot. A loud bang is heard on the video, then a male shouts an obscenity. Then Rosenbaum appears to continue to approach the defendant. Approach, I think that maybe the word chase is in order here. But again, this is not the writer's comments. These are from the charging document. And gets in near proximity to the defendant when 4 more loud bangs are heard. Rosenbaum then falls to the ground. Okay, so in the original charging document, they basically watered down the language. They didn't want to make it look like Rosenbaum was the real attacker, and so they just said that he approached Rittenhouse, but we all know he was chasing Rittenhouse. There's no doubt about it. Rittenhouse is running. The defendant then circles behind a car and approaches Rosenbaum. Again, he approaches Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum remains on the ground. The defendant then circles behind a car and approaches Rosenbaum. Now, that's proper use of the term approach because he's only walking slowly up to him. Rosenbaum remains on the ground. Yeah. The defendant appears to get on his cell phone and place a call. Another male approaches, and the defendant turns and begins to run away from the scene. As the defendant is running away, he can be heard saying on the phone, "I just killed somebody." Now, keep in mind, so far, and this is what his column is centered on, nothing here incriminates Kyle Rittenhouse necessarily. Well, all we have is Rosenbaum is chasing him. Kyle, and he catches up to him. Kyle turns and shoots him. Okay, so at this point, it's not clear who is to blame. Before the shooting, McGinnis was interviewing the defendant. The defendant told McGinnis that he was a trained medic. Yes, that's true. McGinnis said that as they were walking south, another armed male who appeared to be in his 30s joined them and said he was there to protect the defendant. That was Ryan Balch. The defendant had moved from the middle of Sheridan Road to the sidewalk, and that is when McGinnis saw a male, Rosenbaum, initially try to engage the defendant. And they say it tried to engage the defendant. I'd like to know more what that was really. As the defendant was walking, Rosenbaum was trying to get closer to the defendant. When Rosenbaum advanced, the defendant did a juke move and started running. McGinnis stated that there were other people moving very quickly towards the defendant, moving very quickly. Are they galloping, running, jogging? Towards the defendant, McGinnis said that the defendant was trying to evade these individuals. So far, all we have is that Rosenbaum essentially approached Kyle. Kyle had to sidestep him. So that makes it more sound like than Kyle was simply walking. I'm sorry, that Rosenbaum was simply walking towards Kyle. He had to do a juke move to get out of the way of Rosenbaum, and then he starts running. Now, does any of this implicate Kyle Rittenhouse as the person to blame for what took place? In my opinion, no. It looks to me like Rosenbaum is the primary aggressor here. McGinnis described the point where the defendant had reached the car. The defendant had the gun in a low ready position, meaning that he had the gun raised but pointed downward. Okay, so if you're carrying a AR-15 in a single point sling, it's going to be in a position there that a lot of people would say was at the ready. If you're not really familiar with single point slings, it looks like the person is carrying a rifle like he's ready to shoot, but that's how you carry the rifle in a single point sling. And oddly enough, he's a trained police officer, according to him, and he doesn't seem to know that, or at least he doesn't even mention anything about that. The defendant brought the gun up and fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. I thought it was 4. Well, maybe at the time they wrote this charging document, maybe they only thought it was 3. McGinnis said when the first round went off, he thought it hit the pavement. McGinnis felt something on his leg, and his first thought was wondering whether he had gotten shot. Actually, he wasn't. McGinnis was behind and slightly to the right of Rosenbaum in the line of fire when the defendant shot. Okay, so what? They're trying to pin a reckless endangerment charge on Kyle here by claiming that he recklessly endangered McGinnis's life. Okay, fair enough. I don't think that's true, but I mean, I can understand why they put that in there. McGinnis stated that the first round went into the ground, and when the second shot went off, the defendant had the gun aimed at Rosenbaum. McGinnis said that the unarmed guy, Rosenbaum, was trying to get the defendant's gun. Uh-oh, can't do that. Can't do that. Can't chase a person and try to take his gun from him. That's no good. And as a police officer, he should know this. If you're a police officer, and he claims he is, that right there would have raised a red flag. Wait, he was trying to take the defendant's gun? McGinnis stated that after the defendant shot, he ran back towards the hospital, towards the middle of the road. McGinnis stayed and turned his attention to Rosenbaum. McGinnis stated that he then heard the other shots really soon after. Okay, so far, there's nothing here that implicates Kyle necessarily. Sure, it could be that Kyle is to blame, but there's nothing here that is a smoking gun towards that. If anything, Rosenbaum looks like the primary aggressor. And the fact that he tried to take Kyle's gun from him after chasing him should have raised an alarm with this journalist that perhaps that Kyle has a legitimate self-defense claim. A group of several people began running northward on Sheridan Road behind the defendant. A person can be heard yelling what sounds like, "Beat him up." Okay, that's not good for the prosecution here. Another person can be heard yelling that what sounds like, "Hey, he shot him." A fourth video showed a different angle of the defendant running northbound, where a person can be heard yelling, "Get him, get that dude." Now, Notice what they did not say. They didn't mention anything about the one guy who clearly stated, very emphatically, cranium that boy. We all know what that means. That's a death threat. But he doesn't even mention it. Now, this is the charging document. So the prosecution didn't mention that because that wouldn't look too good. Then a male in a light-colored top runs towards the defendant and appears to swing at the defendant with his right arm. Okay, that's pretty mildly, but all right. The swing makes contact with the defendant, knocking his hat off. Okay, so that's an assault. The defendant continues to run northbound. A male can be heard saying something to the effect of, "What'd he do?" Another male responds, "Just shot someone." Then a male can be heard yelling, "Get his ass." The defendant then trips and falls to the ground. Okay, again, at this point, there is nothing stated so far that would necessarily implicate Kyle in a crime. The possibility is open that he might have committed a crime, but there's nothing here that points towards a crime being necessarily have committed. And everything so far seems to indicate that a legitimate self-defense claim can be made. As the defendant is on the ground, an unidentified male wearing a dark-colored top and light-colored pants jumps at and over the defendant. Now, he tried to stomp his head in. Come on. That much is clear on video, and he almost got his ass shot off, too. Based on the sound of gunshots on the video and the position of the defendant's gun, it appears that he fires 2 shots in quick succession at this person. Yep. It appears that the person was not hit as he then runs away from the defendant. Yeah, he was limping a little bit too, but that's probably from just landing on the ground. A second person, who was later identified as Anthony Huber, approaches the defendant, who is still on the ground. Oh, he approaches him. Huber has a skateboard in his right hand. When Huber reaches the defendant, it appears that he is reaching for the defendant's gun. Can't do that. With his left hand, as the skateboard makes contact with the defendant's left shoulder. The skateboard just made contact with the shoulder. Afterwards, a police officer was placed under oath and testified that he inspected Kyle Rittenhouse, and he had a pretty nasty bruise from the skateboard that was just placed on his left shoulder. Huber appears to be trying to pull the gun away from the defendant. Not good. The defendant rolls towards his left side, and as Huber appears to be trying to grab the gun is pointed at Huber's body. The defendant then fires 1 round, which can be heard on the video. I would hope so. Huber staggers away, taking several steps, then collapses to the ground. Huber subsequently died from his gunshot wound. After shooting Huber, the defendant moves to a seated position and points his gun at a third male, later identified as Gage Grosskreutz. And some people are pronouncing it Grosskreutz, whatever, who had begun to approach the defendant. When the defendant shot Huber, Grosskreutz freezes and ducks and takes a step back. Grosskreutz puts his hands in the air. Okay, that's true. Kyle did not open fire. That's not mentioned here. Grosskreutz then moves towards the defendant, who aims his gun at Grosskreutz, shoots him, firing 1 shot. So Grosskreutz, it's clear on video, put his hands up in the air to feign that he was giving up, that he was no longer a threat. But it was purely a feint. He then tries to grab a hold of Kyle's gun, and Kyle takes his arm off for his efforts. Grosskreutz was shot in the right arm. Grosskreutz appears to be holding a handgun in his right hand when he was shot. Okay, so it is not that he appears to be holding a handgun. He is holding a handgun. It's clear. On video, it's shown, and photographs that were released immediately. He clearly has a handgun in his hand. And the writer here, even though this is the charging document, the writer makes no effort here to clarify. We know that he was carrying a handgun. The writer needs to step in at this point and put in brackets that it was later confirmed that he was in fact holding a handgun. Grosskreutz then runs southbound away from the defendant, screaming for a medic, and the defendant gets up and starts walking northbound. The defendant turns around facing southbound while walking backwards northbound with his firearm in a ready position, pointed towards the people in the roadway. Dr. Kelly of the Milwaukee Medical Examiner's Office conducted an autopsy on Joseph Rosenbaum. Dr. Kelly indicated that Rosenbaum had a gunshot wound to the right groin, which fractured his pelvis, a gunshot wound to the back, which perforated his right lung and liver, a gunshot wound to the left hand, a superficial gunshot wound to his lateral left thigh, and a grazed gunshot wound to the right side of his forehead. Yeah, there's a lot missing here. First of all, it doesn't even mention which of these gunshots is the fatal one, almost certainly the one in the back. It also doesn't mention whether they had recovered a bullet or not, and that would have been pretty important, I would have thought, but they didn't mention it. If they didn't recover a bullet, then the question now becomes, why didn't they mention any kind of exit wound? I have another video on that completely. Dr. Kelly also conducted an autopsy on Anthony Hoover. Yeah, we don't care, he died. Okay, so now he's finished up and he's going to now put in his own 2 cents. These are the allegations that will be vetted in a court of law, where 12 people must be convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt of the truth of these allegations. There are no allegations here. There's nothing here. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Kyle is innocent, but they'd better come up with more than this. Because keep in mind, Kyle is claiming self-defense. And everything that's written so far indicates he has a pretty good self-defense claim. If you, dear reader, would give as much consideration to the information you receive, we would have a very different America right now. You don't get to pick sides on facts. But the facts here seem to indicate that Kyle is innocent. We know Rosenbaum chased him. That's a fact. That's on video. In the charging document, it says Rosenbaum tried to take his gun from him. That's stated by Richard McGinnis and is shown on video, and I have another video I'll show you where they sort of confirm that. And as he's running towards the police, people are attacking him. So I don't understand how he's making a claim here that what we have here is so solid that if you just consider what we're saying here, you would recognize that Kyle Rittenhouse is guilty, and the real problem in our country is there are people out there defending him. That's what he's saying. The trouble is the charging document, this may be the weakest I've ever seen, and I've read quite a few. The other problem that he has here is he's placing this charging document in front of the readers. And he's saying, here are the facts as we know them. It's up to you to look at these over and decide for yourself. But this article that he wrote was almost a month later, after the incident. A lot of facts have come to light since then, and he doesn't mention any of them. He's going back to the original charging document. So he's not putting out any effort here whatsoever to inform his readers of the developments. For example, we know that Gage Grosskreutz was carrying a gun. There's no doubt about it. But he makes no effort here to sort of correct the record. And he leaves the charging document with this sort of shady kind of deal like he might have been carrying a gun. So lazy journalism at its worst. And so he comes in here and he says, if you, dear reader, would give as much consideration to the information you receive, we would have a very different America right now. The information we're receiving from him is incomplete and misleading. This is terrible. Just terrible. Okay, so now let's take a look at part 2 of this. This is where things go to hell. Okay, so the title is, and keep in mind, the title is important, Fact versus Opinion in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse. When I was a police investigator from the Pennsylvania State Police, boy, I really have a hard time believing that. I found the job to be very like my work in 10 years as a journalist. Well, we all know how far journalism has fallen, so that is more realistic. The police officer and the news reporter both seek the truth. I don't know about the news reporter so much. For example, how much truth-seeking has he done here? It's been a month since the actual incident, and he's added nothing to this article here that points towards anything that's come out in the light. We both ask the following questions: who, what, where, when, how, and in my view, the most important question, why? Oh, brother, okay, that's a cliche, but fine. I found in both jobs, it wasn't enough to know what you were seeing, but why you were seeing it. Yeah, we get it. We get it. No one's going to disagree with that. He then talks about his job at the municipal authority, and I don't even see why this is even relevant. It's written for a local audience, obviously. He doesn't even clarify who the Clearfield Municipal Authority is, and he mentioned something on Moose Creek Dam. Like, how many people wouldn't even know what that is? Why matters. True. In police work, why is codified in law and in proof. And I don't know about that. Intent is key in the findings of guilt or innocence. Well, not always. Did the person do something intentionally, recklessly, or carelessly? Depends. For some laws, for some crimes, that's not necessarily true. When you are evaluating information to get to facts, you need to know the why. Okay, we get it. Yes. Okay, we get it. Kyle Rittenhouse is a 17-year-old shooter from Antioch, Illinois, who traveled to Kenosha, Wisconsin, armed with a loaded assault rifle. That's false, and we know it's not true. This is where so irresponsible. He did not carry the rifle from Antioch, Illinois, to Kenosha. He bought the rifle in Wisconsin. And this was known well before this article was written. And oh boy, this one is, okay, get ready for this one. In order to commit 5 felonies and a misdemeanor, in my world, you have to try. What kind of logic is that? What kind of logic is that? This is, well, he has to be guilty because he was charged with 5 felonies. And if you charge somebody with 5 felonies, he had to have done it. Oh my God. Y'all remember Richard Jewell? Well, they had the goods on him. Turns out, poor bastard was actually innocent. Meaning, you're doing something on purpose. Yeah, but what if the something is legal? Have you committed 5 felonies? Why? And so the standard of guilt or innocence is whether I committed 5 felonies. Therefore, since I haven't committed 5 felonies, and Kyle is being charged with 5 felonies, then I have to look at Kyle as being guilty. Oh, this is horrible. This is a police investigator, and you wonder how innocent people get thrown in jail. The Kenosha demonstrations were over the police shooting of an unarmed man, Jacob Blake. No, he wasn't unarmed. See how he says, this article is on fact versus opinion, and he's trying to make a claim that Jacob Blake was unarmed. The protests were marked by daily peaceful protesting, followed by confrontations with law enforcement and rioting at night. Yeah, okay. I'll cut him some slack on that one. Kyle Rittenhouse appears to have been responding to the protests as part of some number of armed militia members. Oh, man. This is a month after the incident. They had already scoured his social media accounts. They found no evidence that he was a member of a militia. Zuckerberg, even in an interview, claimed, we looked at his stuff, we really looked hard, and we could not find any connection to a militia. And furthermore, Ryan Balch, who gave an interview after the shootings, but before this article was written, claimed that when he first encountered Kyle, and he didn't know Kyle before the night, when he first encountered Kyle, Kyle was with 2 other people guarding a property. One of those was his friend Dominic Black, and another one was another friend, and I forget his name. They are not militia members. Kyle even said he was not a militia member. Ryan Balch said he was not there as a militia member. They went there to defend some property, and they encountered these three boys hanging out in a car lot far away from any kind of unrest, and they were just hanging there watching this car lot. There is not a smidgen of evidence to suggest that Kyle is a militia member. It's really hard to be a militia member without engaging in some social media banter about it. I mean, how do you communicate? So here, he just assumes it. Let's move on. There exists a video clip of Rittenhouse shown with members of a group early in the evening. Notice he didn't say members of a militia. He says members of a group, getting bottles of water from a law enforcement officer in an armored vehicle. I guess this makes him a militia member because he's getting free water. The officer thanks the armed men for their help, though they are clearly civilians, armed civilians, in violation of the city's 8 p.m. curfew. That's true. We appreciate you guys, the officer says. We really do. Now remember this a little bit later. We appreciate you guys. We really do. This is one of the oddest arguments I've heard. Let's try this out. Let's say I was, just spitballing here, at a riot in Penn State some years ago, and I was in riot gear, and some kid is calling me a Nazi. Okay, so he's in his riot gear, there's a riot going on, and some kid is calling him a Nazi. Got it. And I look to my left, and a boy, and he puts boy in all caps, and I look to my left, and a boy is carrying an assault rifle around. Okay? He'd have been on the ground so fast his eyes would have sparkled. Yeah, and you'd be in jail. Carrying an open rifle is legal in Wisconsin. How do you know that the person is under 18? You can't go and assault people just because you think they might be underage. Notice he doesn't say anything here about coming up and questioning the kid. He would just assault him. This is your police investigator. He doesn't even know the law. But maybe my PSP training was of a higher caliber. No, your problem is that you haven't done your journalistic responsibility. You should have known that open carrying of rifles is legal in Wisconsin. And while Kyle was underage, he's 17 and a half. He's only 4 months away from his 18th birthday. You have no probable cause to think that he's underage. So you can't just assault him. What if you assaulted him and he turned out to be 18? You're going to jail. You should. Police investigator, my ass. Then it gets really strange. Now, this is supposed to be a trained journalist. He's not a writer, obviously not much of a writer. He then turns his attention to the president. Of what possible consequence of this? Okay, let's read it. Your president, the day after the Rittenhouse shooting, said this. That was an interesting situation. He said at a coronavirus task force briefing. He was trying to get away from them. Yeah, that's true. I guess, well, keep in mind, Trump has never been a great speaker. It looks like, and he fell. And then they very violently attacked him. It's hard to read Trump stuff without stammering because he does himself stammer around a lot. He was in very big trouble. Boy, he likes that adverb very, which drives me crazy. He probably would have been killed, but it's under investigation. There's nothing wrong with that statement. He saw a video clip of Kyle being chased and attacked. And he's saying, no, I don't know, it looks to me like they were trying to kill him. I don't know, but it's under investigation. Perfectly reasonable thing to say. But notice that this writer is upset because Trump didn't jump to conclusions, didn't come in and say, Kyle must be guilty. Oh, man, this is bad. In defending a supporter of his, the president never mentioned that the boy had already shot and killed one unarmed person. No, actually, Rosenbaum was trying to grab Kyle's weapon from him. Instead, he blamed left-wing political violence, whatever. To me, a trained journalist and a trained police officer, oh, jeez. I tell you what, man, if these are our officers, we're in bigger trouble than I thought. asking the question why, the problem here isn't that unarmed black people are confronting white guys with guns. Where's this coming from? It's that militia types are self-deputizing and acting illegally in a law enforcement capacity. Okay, now wait a minute. Let's go back. In the part 1, the charging document never said anything about this. Kyle has not even been arrested or charged with this crime of impersonating a police officer. And, in fact, he didn't. At no point does Kyle ever claim to be a police officer. Furthermore, he never tries to detain anyone. He never tries to arrest anyone. He's not even being charged with that. And then he says it's that militia types. Kyle's not a member of a militia. Or at least if he is, he's the most secret militia member on the planet. Are self-deputizing. No, they never did. They're acting as private security. Now, there's a little bit of a legal issue about whether you can do that. If you are acting as a private security, you could be in violation of a misdemeanor. He's not being charged with it. Frankly, I don't think that he actually broke the law in this regard. Again, he's not being charged, but he certainly never tried to portray himself as a police officer. Or at least nothing on video indicates that. The actions of these militia members are illegal. Never mind the cynical thinking of arming yourself and going to a Black Lives Matter protest. I don't know if that's cynical. I mean, it seems to me that it's not being overly cynical to think that you might be attacked if you're at a riot, especially if you're on the wrong side of the political aisle during these riots. And in fact, guess what? Kyle was attacked. The president here blames the victims. And you know what? Sometimes the victims are to blame. Got no problem with blaming victims if they're to blame. Okay, so he talks about Tucker Carlson. So Tucker said this: are we really surprised that looting and arson accelerated the murder? No, I'm not. How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would? Well, that's a good question to ask. I mean, how did this happen? Tucker does something clever here. Well, I'm not sure about that. He runs video of enraged protesters lighting something that looks like a piece of cloth on fire and throwing it over a chain link fence. Same clip, protesters are saying things like, "Kill the police back." For a Fox viewer, that's heady stuff. But it isn't shooting or looting. It's imagery, okay? Tucker is going to make a claim that the world is starting to come to an end here, that 17-year-olds feel that they have to go out and maintain order, and he shows imagery behind the scenes of people throwing stuff. Come on, that's not necessarily clever, and as a journalist, you should know these techniques. You do them yourself all the time, I bet. Carlson is positing, blaming the local government here, that, to paraphrase, someone had to maintain order. Well, that's true. I mean, somebody does have to maintain order. Unless you're an anarchist, which may be the case here, I don't know. The problem with Carlson's argument, emotional as it is, well, I don't think it was really that much of an emotional argument, to be honest with you, is that it is illegal for someone not the police to do so. Technically true. You can't form a group and then go in and overtake the police's actions. However, these were private security personnel. Police do not guard property. If you cost them, they might do it for a fee, but they don't have to. And therefore, getting a bunch of guys together to go down and defend property is not taking over the functions of a police force. Police are not private security personnel. Now, if somebody breaks in and a bunch of guys get together to go do the investigation and round up the culprit, that's acting like a police officer. That's a vigilante group. That is not legal. But defending property? No, you can defend property. I defend my house at night, every night with my guns. And guess what? I am not doing the job of a police officer. I have not broken any laws. This one here. To my reckoning, there are plenty of police in the streets in this instance. So he's making the claim. That the people didn't have to do this. The police were there. They were taking care of things. You don't need to go in there and protect property when the police are there to do that for them. There were plenty of police there. Yeah, they already burned down one car lot the previous night. In fact, they tore up the town. I mean, they took down buildings, they burned up car lots, they ravaged Kenosha, and the police did very little to stop it. The police couldn't stop it. In fact, the police had to dial in National Guard to come in and help them. And that night in Kenosha, what happened? You had cars being burned. You had a church that was almost set on fire. Guess who stopped it? It wasn't the police. According to Ryan and Kyle, they did. This argument somehow that this actions by the militia, and again, Kyle's not a member of a militia as far as we know, was unnecessary because the police had everything under control. I can't imagine anybody being so stupid as this man, but okay. Okay, he gets all worked up on Ann Coulter because she defended Kyle. Notice something how we operate here. We claim somebody's guilty and then we attack people who defend him. That's what he's doing. The president cannot run on a law and order platform while he defends criminals on his side and condemns criminals on the other. So in other words, Kyle is guilty in this man's mind. He's not entitled to self-defense. He's not entitled to even defend himself in court. He's guilty. And if you dare side with him, if you dare question his guilt, you're the problem. And that's what's happened in this country. This reporter is a very clear indicator of what's gone wrong in this country. We used to have this innocent until proven guilty deal going on. But then things changed. And at some point, those who were accused of crimes could not, in the public's eye, defend themselves. And anyone that dared defend them were just as guilty. I remember back when O.J. Simpson was arrested for murder. And there were people there that defended O.J., that said that he was not guilty. But nobody that I know attacked these people. They disagreed with them. They thought they might be crazy, but nobody attacked them. Nobody said, well, you must be a part of this evil empire trying to take over because you think that O.J. was innocent. This thing is relatively new. This idea somehow that you're a villain if you even defend somebody. I suspect, and this is my opinion, that the militia groups here, just like in Charleston and other places, have gone there for hateful reasons and to engage fully armed against unarmed black people. See, now notice how he takes this. He basically made the claim, Kyle is a member of a militia, unfounded, and now he's making the next leap. Kyle must have been there to hurt black people with no evidence to support it. And he casts this thing off by saying, well, I suspect, and this is my opinion. Well, first of all, when you say I suspect, it's kind of clear it's your opinion. But, you're making allegations here. And you're trying to couch it in this language that, well, it's just my opinion. I'm saying you will find a racist attitude underlying these kinds of actions. Based on what evidence? If you have evidence that Kyle was there out of some sort of racist motive, let's see it. Put it in there. These are called insinuations. The president stokes this, inflames this, and defends this. All the president said was, hey, it looks like he's being attacked, but it's still under investigation. When white supremacist James Alex Fields Jr. rammed his car into a crowd of counter-protesters in Charlottesville, killing one and injuring 19 others, the president said there were good people on both sides. Well, that's a complete mischaracterization of what he said. Notice he omits what the president said afterwards. And that made it clear that he was not talking about the white supremacists and neo-Nazis that were in the group, but rather others. Trump cannot run on a law and order message when he is fomenting violent crime. Tucker Carlson and Ann Coulter should be run off Fox for supporting violent criminals, and any decent journalist should resign from Fox's news division because they are the sheep's clothing that the fox wears. Oh, Lord. This is drivel. Oh, man. I particularly hate it when people tell others that they should resign. You should give up your job. You know, if you are a decent person, you would give up your job and go homeless. I hate it when they put these lines on by themselves. Use paragraphs. Every one of these horrible videos I watch flies in the face of proper police training. Like what? You don't shoot people in the back. He's not a police officer. This dude is not a police officer. He is not a police investigator. He can't be. You don't shoot people in the back. I don't know of any police officer that would agree to that. Let's see here. Let me have this down right. A person has attacked people with a knife, and he's stabbed a bunch of people, and he's running towards a preschool loaded with children, and a police officer sees him, and you're saying that you can't shoot him in the back. Really? A police officer is making a claim like that? This is not a police officer. This guy's a fraud. Has to be. There's no police officer would make such a stupid statement. And then he makes another claim. You don't shoot a guy you pulled over for DUI in the back as he runs away when you know who he is, you have his car, and he's been with you doing all of your tests for 45 minutes. Yeah, sure, but what does that have to do with a general claim that you never shoot people in the back? So he makes a general claim, you never shoot someone in the back, and then he invokes his straw man where he creates this perfectly innocent kind of deal and says, well, you don't shoot people in the back. In this situation, true, but that doesn't mean you can't shoot people in the back for other kinds of situations. Flight in itself, we were taught at the State Police Academy, is not an escalation of force. I don't know which police academy you went to, okay, but you have not been trained properly. And there is not a single police officer I know that's going to come on here and say that what you have here is logical and sensible. You do not shoot a man in the back 7 times, point blank range, holding him by his t-shirt in front of his 3 kids in the back seat of a car when you can't identify the crime the man committed and later claims he had a knife in his car. This is your journalist and police investigator. Okay, so let's take a look at this here. You do not shoot a man in the back 7 times, point blank range. Guess what? The state investigated. They told the Kenosha County DA, there's no point, and you guys even bringing charges against this officer. And yet he's saying, oh, you don't do that, you don't do that. Well, the state investigated it. We know their recommendation. So maybe you're wrong. And by the way, he's holding him by his t-shirt. Oh, well, wait a minute. He was holding him by his t-shirt. I guess you can't shoot him at that point. In front of his 3 kids in the backseat of a car. Okay, this is not a police officer. It can't be. A police officer isn't going to say, oh, wait a minute. We can't use deadly force here because he's got kids. His own kids are in the back. And we wouldn't want them to see this. And later claim he had a knife in his car. So notice he had a knife is put in quotation marks to sort of ridicule the idea that he had a knife. No, he had a knife. He admitted it. Anyone have a knife in their car? In your pocket? That man was not holding a knife. No, yeah, he was. He admitted it. And in fact, he admitted he dropped the knife and picked it up. It's in an interview. I have it on one of my videos. He was not brandishing a knife. He was not even facing the officer. Okay. If he was coming at him brandishing a knife, and if the officer commands him to stop and he doesn't, different story, but those aren't the facts. Again, this is not a police officer. He doesn't realize that whoever this is has not had any police training. And they don't understand that a police officer can shoot a fleeing suspect if he feels he endangers the community. A private citizen is more restricted in that area. And this person is examining this from a view of a private citizen, not a police officer. The key is that Jacob Blake was an armed felon. The police knew he was a felon. They called it in. He had a felony warrant for his arrest. Furthermore, he attacked a police officer. Okay? It's a felony. And he's armed. No doubt about it. He had a knife. He admitted it. And he's getting into a car with kids in it. The police officer looks at that and thinks, oh my, if he drives off, we have a potential hostage situation. So in that case, the police officer can open fire. And the fact that he was shot in the back is irrelevant. In fact, it pointed to the officer's innocence. It shows that he was trying to get away from the officer, get into the car with these kids. So this person's not a police investigator. Can't be. Can't be. If he is, he's the dumbest one ever. You don't need to defund the police. You need to have a higher standard of training, like I got with the PSB uniform across the country. And that's expensive. You got to fund that. This is one of those, well, if we only had more training, that ain't going to solve anything. Sorry. I agree with Rick over on Good Luck America on this one. More training isn't going to stop this. More training wasn't going to stop Jacob Blake from trying to get into that car. I studied the Constitution. Odd he doesn't capitalize Constitution. And where police powers come from. Dangling preposition. Yeah, this is a writer. I studied the FBI use of force continuum and its application to real-world situations. Who cares what the FBI says? Okay, again, this guy is not a police officer. It doesn't matter what the FBI's rules are. It doesn't matter. You, as a police officer in your state, are bound by the code of the police officers in that state. It doesn't matter what the feds say. When Rodney King was surrounded by 7 jackals, beating him senselessly on the ground with riot batons, I could think of no police training video I had ever seen where that was legal. Okay, fine. But what does that have to do with this? Kyle wasn't beating these people senseless, and the police officer wasn't beating Jacob Blake senseless. When Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck, it was illegal, probably. And when a heavily armed boy kills in the streets, it's illegal. See how he works it? This is the illegal. This is the illegal. Let's slip in here that Kyle Rittenhouse, therefore, must have committed a crime. Kyle's not even a police officer. If the Kenosha police had the PSP training I had, puts a question mark in there, I don't know why, we wouldn't be here. Boy, this guy brags a lot. If the president and the right-wing media chamber didn't support such criminals and instead condemned such killings, we wouldn't be here. Okay, whatever. Trump cannot have it both ways. This has nothing to do with Trump. This has nothing to do with Trump. Amazingly how they'll take a political division and they'll label Trump on one side. And that's just to try to get you to go to the other. How Trump feels about the Kenosha killings is irrelevant. And it's galling to run on a law and order message while pouring gas on the fire. Okay, don't vote for him then. If you don't like him, don't vote for him. Whatever. I don't care. Of course, the election's over now, but there will be a trial for Kyle Rittenhouse. Well, why? It seems, according to you, there shouldn't even be a trial. He's guilty. Who was illegally in possession of a dangerous weapon. That probably is true. Who intentionally loaded the weapon. Well, yeah, your weapons don't normally get loaded accidentally. Cross state lines. That's false. Went to a protest, true, aimed at and killed a man, shooting him 5 times. No, that's not true. Rosenbaum was only shot 4 times. And aimed at, well, that's misleading. He didn't really aim very much. He didn't have time. He just basically pointed the rifle in Rosenbaum's general direction and opened fire. Did a pretty good job, though, too. I mean, under those conditions, he landed on almost all of them. Kyle Rittenhouse may well have racist motivations. Wait a minute. May well have racist motivations? I thought you said earlier that he must have had racist motivations. That might help explain the why. Yeah, it might have been a serial killer in his private life. That would explain the why as well. But this is conjecture. A trial will tell. Then, if we're going to wait for the trial, why are we reading this shit from you? But even if he did not have such motivations, he still brought an assault rifle to a protest. Okay, charge him for whatever crime that is. It's a misdemeanor. He chose to intentionally. He chose to intentionally. That's true. He didn't accidentally do it. He's a boy. Let's see, he's being charged as an adult, so I don't know how he's making this big deal. He's a boy. He's like a little child, but let's charge him as an adult. Okay. A stupid boy. Okay, a little character slam here. Raised, I'm betting. Okay, so here we go. This is the title is Fact versus Opinion, right? And he says, I'm betting. Well, based on what? And this is the guess. In hate. Not a shred of evidence to support that. He's just, as he admits, I'm guessing. That's not even an opinion. Well, it's an opinion, but it's not even based on anything. He's certainly a killer. Well, yeah, okay. Sure, he's a killer. Everybody who kills in self-defense is a killer. And he puts this on his own line as if this is some sort of a real telling argument he's got here. And this is Donald Trump's America. Again, there's no connection here to Donald Trump. This is what your president supports and defends. Well, no, he didn't support it. They basically said that, what do you think of this? And he's saying like, well, it kind of looks like he was acting in self-defense, but it's under investigation. How is that supporting? He feeds hate. Law and order. Yeah, right. Okay, so let's take a look at his background. Sean Inlow is an English major. Oh my God. Out of Slippery Rock. He's an English major. Dangling prepositions. Horrific structure. He goes in and out of Trump and Ann Coulter. Oh, horrible, horrible writing. A former journalist for the Courier Express in Dubois, I'm not sure, and The Progress in Clearfield and WOKW Radio, a soccer coach since the 70s, a founding member of the Clearfield Art Studio Theater cast, a Pennsylvania state trooper for 20 years. He's retired now. He can't be a trooper. He can't be a member of the police office, of the police department. He just can't. He just makes way too many mistakes. And as far as his journalism prowess, this is the problem with journalism in this country. How many insinuations did he make without any evidence to support them? How many times did he ignore opportunities to do further investigation and didn't do them? How many times did he ignore evidence that came out since the shootings? It's just terrible, terrible journalism here. So, at any rate, there's the problem with this country. This is what fans the flames of hatred. It's not Trump. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a Trump fan. I'm sorry. I know I disappoint a lot of people by saying that. I am not a Trump fan. I think the guy has a lot of problems. However, I can't think that he's to blame for stoking racial hatred when people like this make these kind of claims, write these kind of articles. This is what stokes the racial hatred. It's based on conjecture, innuendo, and tons of bias. Like my video, subscribe to my channel.